Welcome. I'm Gord Long. It's my pleasure to have with me today Mish Shedlock of Sitka Pacific Capital and well known for his website, mishtalk.com. Welcome back, Mish.
Pleasure to be back on the show. I'm back from the California desert. I was out there. They had a lot of rain, a lot of spring wildflower blooms. Not as good as I'd hoping, but I also went to some petroglyph and pictograph sites. Had a good time in the desert, but good to be back.
And I noticed you have a bit of tan. That can't be Chicago winter tan.
No, that's not. That's California Anza-Borrega desert tan is what it is.
Like, what's new?
Well, I got an interesting email. First off, a lot of things going on in Europe. Some interesting things here in the United States with GDP estimates gone haywire. But also a little tidbit that just came in. A reader from Australia sent to me an actual ad, and apparently this is going on all over Melbourne and Sydney, I believe, where home prices and rent prices are just out of sight, that people cannot afford them. And there was an actual ad for a tent in someone's backyard, $90 cheap, it says, a week, full access to the full access with full access to the house. So there you have it. $90 a week to rent a tent in someone's backyard. And apparently this is commonplace. People are quadrupling up in rooms, a bedroom with 4 bunk beds in it, going for $120 a week to share a single room in a house with 4 people. Wow. Or you can have your tent by yourself for $90.
That sounds like New York, except you're not allowed to have a tent. Cardboard around you, maybe, and 15 people in the studio. But I've noticed that rents are starting to collapse in New York. Vacancies are starting to increase, but it appears we might have topped there. Don't know. Too soon. Up here in the Northeast, we've been building apartment complex like there's no tomorrow. They're just literally everywhere. No new houses, just apartments. But when you really look at them, what's so stunning, Mish, is the rents. They're $3,000 a month for a single apartment, and this is
Wow.
outside of Boston, a fair distance. And the people are moving in are two couple millennials, two people working, but that's a lot of money. They could afford a house, but they can't get the down payment. That's my guess of what's going on.
I don't know if
Uh,
they can afford a house.
well, I don't
The,
know, but they.
and then the other thing is, do they want a house?
I think that's where I would agree with you. They don't want it. Matter of fact, I've done a lot of work with millennials with Charles Hugh Smith, and they really have a different view. They saw what their parents went through. They don't see it's in their future, and I've actually talked to some. They're more into an urban setting, not what we think of as the downtown, but more a built-up center where everything's easy. People are close by. They're not having to do the same commute. It's kind of halfway between suburbia. They don't want any part of suburbia, but not necessarily the downtown core of the major city. More affordable outside. That's where I'm seeing the growth.
It's also about mobility. The if they get a job offer, somewhere, and they have to move 3 years down the road, do they really want that hassle of trying to unload that house? So I think mobility comes into play. I think price comes into play. Social stigma, seeing what their parents went through, and not wanting to have that burden of debt, because many of these kids saw their parents divorce or lose their house, or their friends' parents lose their house over this. All of those things combined to one. And the weird thing is they keep doing study after study, and they say, well, they don't know what's going on. To me, it's quite obvious, Gordon.
We're talking about a whole generation removed from the starter homes.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got 75 million baby boomers retiring who you would think would be starting to sell their homes or downsizing. They're not. They're not. If anything is showing, they might even be upgrading a little bit, but they're not selling yet. But if they
Well, their
were,
kids are moving in, and sometimes their
my
kids are
kids,
moving in because they have to take care of their parents.
I have talked to so many people and exactly where their kids are off to college, and they expect the kids when they graduate to move home with them, and for the kids to be at home for 3 or 4 years or 5 years. There's no reason that where they where they know the jobs aren't there or anything else. They just expect that. It's almost accepted in this whole generation. So they're coming home.
Completely different from the car generation, just so totally removed from anyone who grew up as a teen in the 60s. Wow, what a monster big difference.
And very few people yet writing about it, but I know you will. Let's get into Europe. Big week, a lot of things going on in Europe, and we got to start with the Dutch election. Surprise to you at all?
Not really. The polls had been trending that way. Of course, polls were have been so all over the place in numerous places that hardly anything would have been a surprise. But they played it up as a surprise on purpose, even though the polls had shown support for Geert Wilders plunging over the last couple of months. He was projected to win about the polls ranged between 20 and 24, and he came in at 20. He came in second place, which was about what the polls had predicted. The surprise, so to speak, was the support for Rutte, who got ended up with 34 seats in Parliament. But that's still down, 8 or 9 seats, I think, from his previous performance. It was by no means a stellar performance, and Labour got absolutely crucified, down to 9 seats, lost over 20 seats, I think. I don't remember the exact number here. So we're seeing, in a large shift, a big move to the right here. And what helped Rutte was in the very last week, they had this big row with Turkey. The Netherlands kicked out a couple of Turkish ministers. Turkey responded in kind. Rutte's ratings soared up on that. He gave talks about how the Turkish people should integrate. In other words, he was adopting a script straight out of Wilders' playbook, just not as extreme. The voters went for it big time, but still, it takes the 3 top coalitions still could not muster the 76 seats they need. They're at 71. They need another party. It's not going to be Labour. Labour got kicked because it went along with Rutte in the last one. I don't think it'll be the Socialists. Will it be the Greens? Well, there's one other small party whose name escapes me at the moment. CU maybe. They are an extreme, Christian group that wants the national anthem to be announced, and of all the school kids recite the national anthem. So, and Merkel called this a vote against, populism, and congratulated Rutte. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, what really happened here at all? It was a big vote to the right, a big vote against immigration. The parties that were for immigration, the Labour Party, which was for immigration, got crucified here. So all we did was take extreme sentiment, temper it down a little bit. They're going to form some sort of coalition, but this was no victory for Euro, so to speak, as it was as they tried to portray it in the Financial Times, and as Merkel tried to portray it.
That's the key takeaway here on this. And if that's the case, how significant was Turkey's involvement in this? And were they playing politics from a distance?
I think so too. Opposite wise, I think actually Turkey wanted to rouse sentiment and support for Wilders. I think they did it on purpose. Their economy over there is imploding. If they can have a boogeyman to point the finger at, if they can, blame this on the Netherlands, which they did, but often what times when you try and interfere in politics from abroad, that the opposite of the intent happens. And we've seen that in Greece before. We're seeing that in the Netherlands now. So we'll see. I don't think this was a crucial vote by any means. I don't think it solved anything. The certainly Rutt has learned that he needs to be more anti-immigration to get votes. That's the message to me.
Yeah, that we've seen it coming. It's getting stronger. That's how I interpreted it also. What? Let's switch. Let's keep marching across Europe. What about France? Le Pen, Marie Le Pen, I think is coming on strong here.
She is, but I don't know if she can win. I've been following the polls there. Actually, I have said that she can win, but that's not the same thing as saying I think she will win. Right now, it doesn't look like she will, but a lot of things can happen. The same thing is playing out here, in France. Immigration has slowed. Those problems have stopped. There's not been any kind of outbreak or of terrorism recently in France. So those things are leaning towards the status quo, sort of. The socialists got knocked out. The right got knocked out. The center left and the center right are gone. So Emmanuel Macron is trying to play this little game of we're not either left nor right, but I don't know how well those policies are going to play out. And there's still a big wild card as to what happens if Turkey unleashes another wave of migrants.
Well, that's what they were threatening this morning when I got up and read the press, and how many million a month. They were very threatening about it. They're just going to open the gates.
If they do it, it can impact the election in France. It could impact the election in Germany. Meanwhile, Greece is back in the spotlight. I got a post out on this just a little bit ago. The U.S. is pressuring the IMF to drop support for Greece. There's a bill in Congress to that effect, actually, right now. I forget the exact quote. It was the IMF was on the lines of the IMF is supposed to be a lender of last resort, not a fig leaf of first support. And I know Trump is leaning that way. He cut some money from the World Bank. So there's a lot at play here. And, Trump has gone on records that Germany is better off on its own accord. The unemployment rate ticked up again, over 23% in Greece again. That's overall. Youth unemployment, I didn't see the number, but it has to be above 50 or close to 50 anyway. And with the IMF dropping out of this, there's huge amounts of money due from Greece to repay the ECB and other parties. It's culminating in July with $8 billion due. Is actually a lot of money to Greece. I don't know where they come up with this money, especially if the IMF walks out of this proposal. So at long last, after everyone's almost forgotten about it, or perhaps because no one cares about it anymore because there's more pressing issues, the migration policy, things going on in Italy, things going on in France and Spain, the Catalan independence movement in Spain, that Greece is almost on the back burner now. No one cares about Greece, so now is maybe the perfect time for Greece to implode. But its GDP sunk 1.2% the last quarter. How are you supposed to pay back money when your GDP is imploding, unemployment rate is rising, and they're going to struggle to meet interest payments on the debt alone, and debt to GDP's out of this world, 180%. Incredible. These are all things, Gordon, that you and I knew in 2009, that none of these packages were in our third bailout package. And of course, none of these bailout packages had anything to do with bailing out Greece. It had to do with bailing out Greece's creditors, and more importantly, temporarily putting a slide to this to this fear of someone leaving the Eurozone. After we've had Brexit with the UK leaving the EU, and with Greece being so small and other pressing problems everywhere, I think now's the perfect time for this to happen. There still might be one more agreement here, but the anti-bailout sentiment in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Finland, in other places towards Greece, when they've got these pressing immigration issues, isn't there.
Well, as we both know, that Greek bailout, and as you said, was about their Greek creditors, and we need to appreciate the Greek creditors are the French and German banks, and with some Italian banks in there too. But they're really the main banks. On immigration, a year ago, if I was to talk to my wife's relatives, and I did, who are from Vienna through Austria, parts of Hungary, etc., no matter what, and raise the immigration issue, which we were discussing, it was like, yeah, change the subject. It wasn't important. Now, Mish, a year later, I don't dare raise it with them. They're so angry they raise it. To see the needle, how far it's gone and how quickly, because now they're seeing it in they live in little towns, little farming towns, little community. So it was always a city problem. Now as one of them said to me,
My problem. When it becomes my problem,
as my and now because they said it reminds me of the old days where the gypsies used to move in and steal on the edge of town and steal all the chickens. Now they got a new set of problems, and so it's just dramatic how it shifted. Now you went through the countries, the issues in Holland, France, Spain, Greece. What about Italy? Because last time we talked about, we were going into that referendum. We know the results of it. Uh, what does Grillo look like right now? Any comments there?
Yeah, he's strengthening here, and how do you pronounce his name? Berlusconi?
Yeah, right. Pepe Grillo is what I call it. Anyway.
No, not Pepe Grillo.
Rizzo. Yeah, the resigned president you're referring to?
Yes, yes. He came out last week and said that he wanted a parallel currency with the euro. So here we are. We're still in a situation where the only major party, and it's imploding, is Matteo Renzi's PD party, is the only one in favor of staying on the euro. Now, the Italians as a whole still want to stay on it, but it's not by some overwhelming percentage like it is in France. So for Italy to leave is a lot easier. Now, they still have to pass a lot of hurdles. They have to pass a constitution. They got to get the people to vote on it. This coalition has to come together. Because no one's going to, get enough seats outright to win. But it's not that hard to envision when 3 out of 4 want something and the fourth is imploding. that those three are going to get together, if for no other reason than to get together for that one issue. And something interesting happened in Italy just in the last couple of days. The reforms that Matteo Renzi had passed that were likely actually to help improve the economy, even if just a little bit, gone. They axed them. One of the unions protested, asked the Italian court to send the whole package up for referendum. Renzi did not want to risk losing another referendum, so I guess the compromise there was they just killed those reforms. So everything that Renzi ran for is now officially dead. And, that this guy wants back in power. He thinks he can govern. The setup, according to Euro intelligence, is Italian politics proves that Italy, is just not going to be able to catch up with the rest of the Eurozone. And that poses a problem because if there's no reform, if there's no economic improvement, eventually, someone's going to say, hold up a copy of the Maastricht Treaty and say, rip it up and say these debts are now null and void. And that's the way we're heading. People discount that because it takes a number of factors, three parties getting together, a constitutional amendment, and a vote on it. But people are getting angry enough that eventually that's going to happen, especially with reform debt.
So when they rip it up, who's the big creditor that loses? So let's talk about Germany and Target 2 accounts, especially with Merkel today facing Trump in the White House. And what she says, not forget with Trump, what she says back to the German people. I'm sure they're watching very, very carefully. What's going on in Germany, and specific these Target 2 accounts?
Well, Target 2 is a funding mechanism. I believe it's symbolic of capital flight. Other people disagree with me on that. But regardless of how you view it, it's close to $1 trillion or approaching $1 trillion, over 800 billion now. That's owed to Germany from the rest of the Eurozone.
Primarily Spain, Portugal, Italy, the southern.
Yeah. But the bulk of it is actually Spain and Italy. About 350 billion of that is Italy. Now, is Italy in a position to pay back 350 billion euros? Not going to happen. And there was an interesting question. Someone asked Jens Weidemann, the president of the Bundesbank, the German central bank, about that. And he commented something to the effect of well, in theory, this has to be paid back in euros, and something along the lines of in practice, it might be different words, but that's pretty much what it was.
Those sound like weasel words.
Well, it sounds like an honest assessment, actually, which is a rarity coming out of the Eurozone these days. It's an admission that if Italy walks, that Germany's not going to get paid back. It will trigger an immediate collapse across the board. Why? Because Spain will be responsible for its portion of that non-paid back. Actually, Greece is responsible for its tiny little piece. All the other countries, who themselves have these big Target 2 deficits, would now have to, in addition, take on their fair share of Italy's. It ain't gonna happen, Gordon. So the whole system here is poised to explode. It's been that way for 10 years. Italy leaving the Eurozone would certainly trigger it.
We've got Merkel fighting with Trump right now about Ukraine and specifically NATO. We heard they're currently Germany's paying 1.2% of GDP for military towards NATO. She's agreeing that they're going to move it to the 2% target. She actually made that announcement in her press announcement here today. They've always said they would do it, putting big strain on the Germans. You can be assured the other countries won't match up. At some point, the German people have got to realize who the sucker is here at the garden party. And I'm not talking about the payments there, just in general. They've been paying continuously.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because I lived in Germany during the reunification with the East Bloc, and even though they were happy to be together, the burden that East Germany put on the German people and the sacrifice for 10 years to get the economy back in balance, they're always having to pay. And I can sense the frustration, and something in here is going to break, and it could come to surface during the fall elections with Merkel, and she may be the catalyst. I don't know.
I'm leaning right now to saying Merkel does not get reelected, even if CDU, CSU somehow comes out on top. There's two ways this can happen. Right now, they're neck and neck. The latest poll was 31%, each. You can build a coalition either with that 31% or with the opposites 31%. And I think there's a lot of parties that just want to get rid of Merkel because they've had enough, that unless sentiment swings really badly back towards that direction, even if she wins, let's say she wins 33 to 29 or something, there's room there for the opposite, for people to say, I'm not forming a coalition with Merkel, and for someone else to go in there. There's also room for some sort of strange compromises, the likes of which would be extremely foreign to the United States, such as Merkel agreeing to do it for 2 years and then stepping aside for the next 2 years for someone else. All of these kinds of things are in play, but I think something big is going to give here. Certainly not that I have any love for Schultz. In a lot of ways he'll be worse, but people are that sick of Merkel. And anyone new that comes in is not going to have the same clout that Merkel had in keeping the EU and EMU together.
The only longer-serving country leader right now is Putin in Russia. Mm-hmm. Merkel's about 12 or 13 years now. What does this all mean? This incredible disruption and unrest and populism that's going on in Europe that you're close to, but a lot of our listeners may not be. What's it mean to investors right now?
Well, that's the interesting thing, that despite the stock markets being all-time high or near all-time highs, we have all of this unrest. Consumer sentiment survey came out in the United States, and apparently it's going through the roof. John Hussman had an interesting chart last week, and he showed consumer sentiment since like 2000 or so. I can't remember how far back he went to now. And every rise in consumer sentiment and every dip exactly matched. I drew some lines on his chart showing dips in sentiment and dips in the stock market. The sentiment is doing nothing more than measuring the stock market. So, people are expecting sentiment to have a buoyancy effect on consumer spending. And it was interesting to see Econoday. I mean, their analysis, Bloomberg Econoday, is absolutely horrendous. I make fun of it all the time. But one of the comments that came out just this last week was this gigantic mismatch between consumer sentiment and spending, and saying, it's got to resolve one way or another. Well, really, all that sentiment is just a coincident indicator of the stock market. And we can prove that with a picture.
I have charts right here, right now, that show that, Mish. If you go back even further on the sentiment, whether the Michigan or the consumer, we have actually a very perfect head and shoulders going back into 1990 that's forming with economic growth, GDP on the bottom, slowly going down, and it's almost a perfect neckline. And it corresponds to the market, as you said, which is sending a signal this could be another one of those final highs on a right shoulder before it starts to come off, especially if we were to see a recession. Not predicting, I'm just saying some of these charts are pretty clear.
Yeah, people have been calling for that for a long time, and some plunges even. But I still don't know if we get this plunge as opposed to a long, just period of stagnation or decline. It won't matter. You look at things like Illinois pension plan. The Illinois state legislature pension plan is 13% funded. What are we going to do?
I saw that, and just as I thought it couldn't be any worse, I saw 13%. Yeah, it's terrible.
Absolutely amazing. But here we are with all this angst and anxiety and everything else, with the stock markets both in the U.S. and Europe performing quite well. And so what happens when they stop performing so well? And the GDP numbers, by the way, we need to talk about that. This is the last topic, I think.
Just a point on that before you leave it, Mish. The markets may be going up, but we need to remember the central banks are still pumping $200 billion a month right now. 80 billion in the ECB, 80 billion in Japan, and the rest out of Bank of England and others. And after November 1st, in the last 2.5 months, the U.S. Treasury's dumped another $200 billion one time into the market. So there is so much pumping going on, and now it's starting to slow. Japan, Draghi said he's going to take it back to 60. Japan signaled this week they may be. I'll wait and see. That was a one-time out of the U.S. Treasury. So the market is up because the liquidity is beyond anything we've ever seen before, and it's got to land somewhere. So we'll see. And I need to make one point. I'm not calling for collapse in my comments here. If a correction of 10% is too frightening right now in collateral values, you can expect the central banks, and you have 12 of them buying the equity markets right now, not the U.S. government on theory, who've already say they're buying the market. Look at Japan. So the central banks have a lot more ammunition. Don't quit on them yet.
We've gone a record number of days without a 1% correction now. The string is in place. So really quite amazing there. Now, well, the collapse is going to come. It's just going to be a slow, 8% this year, 5% the next, 10% the next, a 5% rally, a 15% decline. None of that looks anything like a collapse. But at the end of that time, all of a sudden, the stock market's down 30 or 40%. And you know what? That doesn't even get back to fair value if it happens in the next 3 years.
That's the kind of environment you get in a stagflation environment. This grinding, slower, up, down, but just a steady downward pressure, as opposed to what we've seen is these violent corrections over the last decade and a half.
Mm-hmm. These GDP forecasts now are really, quite interesting. And people ask me, well, why do you spend any time on this? GDP is such a ridiculous. GDP is a ridiculous number. But I kind of find it an interesting intellectual exercise, trying to figure out just what it's going to do. And so there's, two models out there. They claim not to be in competition. I don't know if they are in competition, actually. But the Atlanta Fed has its model. It's called GDP Now. And the New York Fed, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, has what they call Nowcast on the same economic data. One of them has been going like this, and the other one has been going like that. They virtually crisscrossed each other on the same data. GDP Now went from 3.4% in February to 0.9%, and Nowcast didn't start from the depths of hell, but it rose to 3.2%, and they essentially crossed each other, looking at much of the same economic data. Now, there's some differences. One looked at the odd report. One, they look at different things in the jobs report. Some of them consider the Fed regional manufacturing reports, and others don't. But those things have, in general, a very small impact on the estimates. So we're essentially talking about the same data and the things going this way. Now, the interesting thing here is the margin of error on these is allegedly 1% for both of them, and they are 2.3% apart. So that's not possible. You can't split the difference and come up with it. Sally Mita at Statistical Ideas came out with this. He looked at the material that I put together and further commented on it. And he said there's a 2/3 probability that they're both wrong within their own margins of error. So, in other words, he thinks it's going to, hit that little gap there in the middle, but or simply be wrong in some other fashion. So I don't know. I lean towards the Atlanta Fed model. And in general, I look at these models and generally side with the weaker one, but not always. And the construction report was lousy. The economic reports in general have been lousy. Industrial production report today was actually pretty good, but it was a pretty good 0%. Manufacturing was up, but other components were down, and they blamed the weather. Well, okay, maybe, because the weather did impact industrial production in December and January. Did it do it in February again? I don't know, but we've been talking about weak industrial production since 2015. We've not had cool weather in the summer, shutting off the need for air conditioning, and warm weather in December, shutting off and January and February, shutting off the need for heating. We've not had unusually good and unusually bad weather to this kind of thing for the last 2 years. I don't buy it.
In wrapping, Mish, question: do you see a recession in the United States in the next 12 months? And any key message you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Don't know. As you know, I'd called for them a number of times, and my gosh, that data certainly dipped down there, and looked like it. Jobs are a lagging indicator, but even with jobs, I'm noticing this discrepancy between the household survey and the actual jobs survey from manufacturers, or excuse me, the actual jobs survey. The difference is pretty wild. The one of them is averaging about 127,000, and the other one's averaging 197,000. That's a difference of over 60,000 a month between employment and jobs. I still maintain that a lot of this is people working extra part-time jobs. I even though that data isn't supported by the actual report on part-time jobs. Otherwise, I'm at a loss to explain this discrepancy. It's been going on a long time. So I don't know. A recession at any point here would not surprise me. Certainly the Fed is hiking into, if you believe the Atlanta Fed GDP now, the Fed is hiking into a weakening economy. We've got lots of problems in Europe that are still unresolved. And we've got, if Trump acts and puts tariffs, actually does what he said he's going to do, labels China a currency manipulator, or starts a trade war with China or a trade war with Germany, I think prices are going to go up, but it's not going to do anything but increase the deficit because jobs are going to go away. So that's my take. Now, the question here is whether or not Trump actually does what he says he's going to do. So far, he's tried to do almost everything he said that he wanted to do with limited success. We'll see if he actually does something on this record and starts a trade war with Germany and China. Yeah, a recession's coming.
Trump's quite clear, at least in the rhetoric, he does not want a trade war. That's not what he wants. He just wants fair trade. We'll see what triggers it. But he is delivering or attempting to deliver, and I have to give him his due, on everything he said. He's being very aggressive in trying to deliver. But what we're really seeing is how dysfunctional our Congress can be of getting agreement on anything.
Absolutely.
And it's no matter what, there's no such thing as bipartisan, and that's what's becoming really blatant.
His number one idea was to get rid of Obamacare, and here, the House passed how many bills? Dozens or a dozen or so, or was it even more than that? Resolutions to kill Obamacare. Of course, it never got anywhere because the Democratic Senate wouldn't go along, and of course, Obama would have vetoed it anyway. But now that we've got Republicans in control of the executive and both houses, where's the bill? Can't even get a bill here out. So, that shows you how hard it is actually to take away entitlements once they're promised. The Republicans are all worried now that if they stop giving all this free money to Medicaid in the states, that they're going to lose seats in the midterm elections. So they're all just a bunch of hypocrites.
I think the real disappointment is going to be, for example, everybody's excited and the euphoria that went into the new tax plan that he's proposing or suggesting. We haven't seen the details, but generally, I think we'll be into next year before that's implemented. I think infrastructure.
Possibly not.
They better get it out early. But infrastructure, defense spending, a lot of these things are getting pushed. Every time I hear it, the new budget are getting pushed out further and further and further. And a lot of our market, besides the liquidity I talked about, is built on this euphoria of policies that are very positive, are pro-business in it. They're fiscal stimulus, tax reductions, and regulatory reductions. And Trump's made some inroads. But there's been a lot promised here that I don't think the Congress is in sync with.
Absolutely. Paul Ryan wants one thing. If Paul Ryan's budget proposal for these BAT taxes, border adjustment taxes, passes, it's going to be a job killer that's immediately going to hurt the United States. Merkel has threatened to file a lawsuit.
If the retail industry isn't already in enough troubles, that tax may be the death knell, and you better be shorting retail commercial property because it's going to be. And you think the wave is strong now? You haven't seen anything that would start to happen within the 12 months. We got a break, Mish. Great. There's so much to talk about, and I'm sure next month we'll have a list just as long. Could you tell our listeners how they could follow your work?
Do a Google search for Mish or simply go to mishtalk.com, my photography blog. Don't miss it. Mish Moments. I've been covering Iceland. I've got a series running called Iceland in 16 Days. If you're at all into photography, I think these pictures are pretty stunning. So check it out. Maybe you can throw one of those pictures into your podcast, Gordon.
We did a couple months ago in the Puffins when you first came back. You had 3 absolutely stunning ones. Talk to you next month.
Check it out and check out Mish Talk and Mish Moments. Catch you in a month, Gordon.